Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Wenchi Yu. The word tariffs is trending these days because the US President elect Trump has said more than a few times that he would impose hefty tariffs, starting with goods from Mexico, Canada, and China. It's highly anticipated that Trump would not hesitate to wage a trade war on the United States' largest trading partners. How would that upend the current global trade system and the world economy? Today, to further discuss this, I speak to former Mexican ambassador to China from 2007 to 2013. Welcome, Jorge. President elect Trump announced on Truth Social that on his first day in office, he would impose 25% of tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and an additional 10% to the existing tariffs on China to stem drugs and illegal migration problems from these countries. What do you think?
Well, clearly, tariffs are something he's known of, he's proud of. He mentioned it in campaign that tariff is a beautiful word, that was his favorite word in the dictionary. So I think tariffs will be a constant tool of his administration. He started by mentioning Mexico and Canada and 25%, and then China with additional 10%. He tied it to policy issues unrelated to commerce, to trade.
Why do you think that's the case? Because I think a lot of people actually have questions. They're saying that his threats are really just a tactic to get people to the negotiation table. His goal is really to address drugs and illegal migration issues. But why using tariffs?
So I think there are two reasons why he started with Mexico and Canada and mentioning in particular fentanyl and immigrants. And that is one, because it is clear that President elect Trump will be using the US market as a selling point for the United States. I say, if you want access to the US market, you have to do as the US wants. Why tie it to immigration and fentanyl? Clearly, those are two areas that he wants addressed. In order for him to implement these tariffs, he has to declare a state of emergency. In order to declare a state of emergency that withstands court challenges, he has to prove that there is an issue to be addressed through this state of emergency. And clearly, fentanyl and immigrants is something that I assume his lawyers think would withstand the challenge in the courts.
That's quite interesting. That angle, I don't think most people are aware of. In order to impose such hefty tariffs, you would have to justify legally through the emergency. And the emergency, obviously, to him, will be illegal migration and illicit drugs traffic.
So there are several routes to impose tariffs. We learned about how the lexicon in the past administration, 232, 301 tariffs. The thing is, all of those take time. You need to have a comment period. You need to have a review process. So if you want to start immediately imposing tariffs, the way to do it is to declare a state of emergency. That's why he is going and mentioning these two issues that he is linking to national security, therefore state of emergency.
Well, he clearly has gotten all these countries' leaders' attention, whether he's really going to impose that particular percentage of tariffs or not. We saw that Mexico's relatively new president, Sheinbaum, and Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau have vowed to retaliate and unite against Trump's threats. And Beijing state media also said Trump is scapegoating China for US domestic drug problems. What do you think those leaders' responses? In particular, let's focus on Mexico's.
So Mexico has been cooperating with the United States on immigration, and it's starting to cooperate more aggressively on fentanyl or fighting organized crime. Uh, if those are the two asks that the Trump administration makes in order to leave trade untouched, I think those are asks that can be met by Mexico. And my guess, and with this, we're all guessing. Nobody knows what he is going to do, and that's by design. That's how he likes it. But I'm going to venture a guess. I think at the end of the day, Canada and Mexico will address his concerns. We will move on, and he can now focus on other countries and other issues that I think are more important to him, and that is China in particular.
You say China is more important to him, or do you think he thinks Mexico and Canada will compromise? This is like early victory for him, but the hard one is really China, right?
The threat that China poses, not just to the United States, but to every country in the world when it comes to exporting its overcapacity, is an existential threat. That is not happening with Mexico or Canada, to be honest. So every country in the world has to address the issue that China has humongous overcapacity that it plans to dump all over the world. And we all have to see how we protect our markets, our jobs, our industry. So that is why I say China is more important to him. It represents more of a threat. Again, we are guessing here.
It sounds like he's pretty, at least rhetorically speaking, prepared to even, incur some harm to the U.S. Domestic economy as well. I do want to talk a little bit about sort of the China, Mexico, U.S. Trade relationship, which I find fascinating. Obviously, because of the trade tensions, a lot of Chinese companies have moved their supply chain to or set up factories in Mexico.
Not really. That's a story that's been overplayed in the United States that lacks substance. So there have been a lot of announcements of Chinese companies announcing that they're going to set up manufacturing plants in Mexico. Most of them are auto parts companies that were invited by Tesla. And by invited, I mean requested by Tesla that they come and set up shop in Mexico, where Tesla was supposed to set up one of its giga factories. What ended up happening is that Tesla canceled its plans for the Gigafactory. Most of these announcements did not come to fruition. As of today, China is not in the top 10 countries with foreign direct investment into Mexico. So if you read the US news, you read about a Hofusan industrial park and about all these companies. It's a US news thing, it's not the reality.
So, what is Mexico's attitude towards this? Do they welcome more Chinese investments?
Well, I would say when she no country, probably in the world, is as aligned economically with the United States as Mexico is. The Mexican government has been very clear that we are aligned with the North American market and, if necessary, separating ourselves from China. The fact of the matter is that Mexico gains next to nothing in our trade with China. We have a humongous trade deficit. We export very little, and the very little we did export or we do export, they raise all sorts of non-tariff barriers. So we have no interest in trying to hedge with China. For us, it's very clear that our future lies in the North American market.
Yeah. America still matters way more to Mexico.
Mexico and Canada are the two countries in the world whose largest percentage of exports go to the United States. Now, the problem with that is that you become susceptible to the whims of the United States. And yes and no. The United States also exports more to Mexico than it does to China, Japan, and Korea combined. So, I mean, if you were to start raising tariffs, there would be counter tariffs in Mexico. It would be a race to the bottom. You would hit more US companies. Whereas when you hit Chinese imports, you're hitting mostly Chinese companies. Sure, some US companies as well who are integrated into the Chinese supply chain. But when you hit Mexico and Canada, you're hitting US companies directly.
I think Trump's threats of tariffs has gotten the world's attention more than just the three countries that we mentioned. A lot of European countries are paying attention and in Asia as well. And so, what do you think, and how will Trump 2.0's trade policy upend global trade?
I don't think it's Trump upending global trade. I think it's China upending global trade. It was China who started doubling down on manufacturing and exporting its overcapacity. And that was, I think, upending the whole free trade argument in which countries would export goods in which they had a competitive advantage. The fact of the matter is that China is exporting all sorts of goods in which it has no competitive advantage other than government support. The world is now reacting, and Trump is a case in the United States, but even countries friendly to China, like Brazil, are raising tariffs on Chinese imports. Turkey is raising tariffs on Chinese imports.
What are some of the other trade and economic issues we should be paying attention to from your point of view in the Trump 2.0 administration?
Something that I've been focusing a lot, Wenchi, is the fact that the United States is banning a lot of superior products from its market. Take the case of Chinese EVs. By all accounts, Chinese EVs are superior to most US options. Maybe Tesla is up there competing with them, but even then, Chinese EVs beat them on price. And they've been banned in the United States. They have 100% tariffs. They've now been banned if they're connected. So, for all intents and purposes, they've been banned. So, first, you have a case in which the US consumer no longer has access to the best products in the world. The other thing is, US companies are going to be facing competition in all the other markets. So, if you're for General Motors, you're losing ground in China to Chinese, but you're also doing it in Brazil, in Mexico, in Turkey, in Thailand, in all other important markets, all where they're losing line of sight of what Chinese competition looks like because they don't have it in their own market. We're starting with cars, maybe it goes on to drones, lidar technologies, autonomous technologies.
So, what is your proposed solution?
I think there should be an exit strategy for the current tariffs on Chinese imports. So you have to give local companies a leg up so that they can catch up to the lost ground in the advantage Chinese companies have taken on US auto manufacturers. Perhaps a little industrial policy in the US, but eventually you need an exit strategy in which you do allow the competition to come into your market because you cannot wall yourself off from from competition, especially if you're picking trade wars with other countries in which your products will now be at a disadvantage because they'll be facing tariffs. I think the US needs to be aware that they're not just competing in the US, that now they're competing for the world, and it's not enough to just wall itself off.
What else can the US do, though? What if the Chinese industries are just more competitive these days? Other than protectionism, what are the other tools?
It's a hard reality. It's not a reality that I think the United States is ready to accept. That China does have a huge advantage on several industries, definitely on green technologies, on EVs, EV batteries, lidar, drones, autonomous vehicles. So it's a huge realization. I think China achieved it in big part through industrial policy. I think the United States will have to come to terms that in order to start competing in certain industries, that they too may have to incur in industrial policy to support industries.
I really appreciate this last comment because I think fundamentally that's the most important and bigger issue the US has to ask itself. Whether it's using tariffs or other tools as a policy to protect the US economy and workers and industries, at the end of the day, the bigger question is how can the US continue to be competitive and be leader in many of the sectors? And it's probably too big of a question for us to answer right now, but I want to thank you so much for speaking to us about trade and tariffs in the upcoming Trump administration. Thank you.
With great pleasure. Thank you, Wenchi.
This has been a special episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from Taiwan Plus News, follow us on social media. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
We make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.